Hello everyone. Okay, on this video, I'm just going to go over very briefly the primaries of 2020. Again, you can use this as a bit of a case study perhaps if you are doing an essay about primaries and caucuses to highlight perhaps some of their strengths and weaknesses, which we'll discuss in a previous lesson, or in a future lesson, sorry. Now, there were primaries for the Democrats and also for the Republicans. Now, the first thing to note is if there's an incumbent president for a political party, that doesn't mean primaries and caucuses don't take place in that party. What happens though, usually the incumbent president doesn't face a serious challenge. And this is what happened for Trump. There were two challenges to him in the primaries. They weren't very serious. They didn't last very long, etc., etc. But there have been some occasions in the past when there has been a serious challenge. Most noticeably, in 1980, Jimmy Carter faced a serious challenge from Senator Ted Kennedy, who did quite well in the primaries and caucuses, and although he was defeated, it did weaken President Carter because it made the Democrats in that case look quite weak. And in a similar way, in 1992, George H.W. Bush faced a serious and unexpected challenge from Pat Buchanan, a social conservative who did well in Iowa and some of those early states. Again, he too looked weak as a consequence, and both Carter and Bush actually lost the election. So presidents tend to try and make sure there's no serious contenders in the primaries. So Trump kind of sailed through his primaries with no serious challenge, raised lots of money in those months, and was able to sit back and watch the Democrats fight amongst themselves and possibly plan how he was going to use that to his advantage. This is what Obama did against Mitt Romney in 2012. He basically saw which adverts the Republicans running against him, his opponents, saw which ones seemed to hurt him, and then kind of replicated those adverts in the actual election itself. Now, the Democrats had a really huge field of candidates for this election. So before Iowa, during the invisible primary, there were 29 candidates in total said they'd quite like to run for president and started raising money and stuff. 18 of them actually stepped down before the Iowa caucus took place. So that left 11 who started the race at Iowa in February 2020. Before Iowa, there were 7 debates took place amongst all these candidates. Between Iowa and March the 15th, there were 4 more debates that happened between the different remaining candidates. And as I'd already said in the previous video, in Iowa, Joe Biden came, I think it was 5th. Yeah, he came 5th in Iowa. In New Hampshire, he also came 5th. He got 13% of the vote in Iowa and 8% in New Hampshire. That would normally spell doom for a candidate, and it was true. There were lots of media reports saying his campaign's flawed, he's running out of money, he did seem to have financial problems, Pete Buttigieg, who did unexpectedly well in Iowa, but he'll make an interesting candidate, and Sanders was being talked about. Biden was kind of being written off. And it's quite unusual for a candidate to actually do so badly in Iowa, New Hampshire, and then in Nevada, which was a caucus a week or two later, to actually win. But that's exactly what Biden does. And he does really, really well in the state of South Carolina, which was, I think, was the 4th state that had primaries and caucuses in 2020. And if you have a look, let's get to the right page. If you have a look, that's the result in South Carolina, and you can see there that Joe Biden has a complete victory, 48.6%. Okay, it wins every single county in South Carolina. The black vote support him, the working class vote in South Carolina. This, Joe Biden argues, is a state which is more typical of America, basically, and therefore that's the reason why he should be chosen as the candidate. And following this is the primary that really boosts Joe Biden. He gets loads of money, starts pouring in, endorsers start coming to him. Some of the candidates who dropped out after Iowa say that they'll transfer their support to Joe Biden. So this is where his campaign really kicks off. And it was really important because a few days later, I think it's about a week later, you saw Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday is when a number of states across America have their primaries on the same day. And as you can see here, it really becomes a 2-horse race following Super Tuesday. So you can see that Joe Biden wins some really big states like Texas, he wins Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, I can see Alabama there, Arkansas, and at the top Minnesota, which he wasn't expected to win because Bernie Sanders did really well in Minnesota 4 years previously. Sanders wins California, hence why he has lots of delegates. It's a really big state, but he only just wins it. Colorado, and I think that's Utah, I think, isn't it, next to Colorado? So Super Tuesday sees Mike Bloomberg bow out. Elizabeth Warren, who does quite well early on, she drops out not much further down the line. So it really becomes a two-horse race following Super Tuesday. Just a little note of interest. Mike Bloomberg, he was a former governor, no one, he was former mayor, of New York City, a billionaire, was a Republican who became independent and then became a Democrat. He despises Trump with every fibre of his being. He spent on his campaign $1 billion. For that $1 billion, he won one state and 59 delegates. Joe Biden, interestingly, spends only, $108 million. Bernie Sanders throughout the campaign spends $204 million. So it's quite interesting as well, this primary, how the person with the most money and spent the most money didn't actually win. Again, that is a little bit unusual. Normally the person with the most cash normally is able to win because they can run most adverts against their opponents and do all that kind of stuff. So it became a two-horse race basically following Super Tuesday. And I'm going to show you a little news clip which it gives you a bit of a flavour of the campaign that happened between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders ahead of 6 more states that voted. I haven't got the exact date of them. I think it's about the when was it? It's about the 13th of March, 14th of March, something like that, before states like Michigan had their primaries. So this little news clip tells you some of the nature of the campaign and what types of things happen during primaries.
Contenders for the Democratic presidential nomination face off next week in 6 more states. Here's Nicole Killian.
What a difference a week makes.
In the show-me state, former Vice President Joe Biden showed out.
This time last week I was in South Carolina. They hadn't finished voting. And the press and the pundits had declared Biden's campaign is dead.
Bolstered by a delegate lead, a flurry of endorsements, and an infusion of cash, the newly minted frontrunner took on his Democratic opponent.
Senator Sanders likes to say he'll need a record turnout to defeat Donald Trump. He's right. And we're the campaign that's going to do that record turnout.
A two-person race. That's what we got.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders adjusted his schedule to stay focused on Michigan, a state he narrowly won in 2016.
I just don't think that Joe Biden can generate enthusiasm. I have zero doubt in my mind that together we are the campaign that can beat Trump.
With the competition tightening, Sanders sharpened his contrast with Biden on trade and Social Security.
Medicare, that is the gorilla in the room. And you've got to put all of it on the table. Everything.
The Biden campaign countered, launching its largest single advertising blitz.
Joe Biden has always been a strong supporter of Social Security.
A $12 million buy across 6 states. As Biden and Sanders duke it out, they'll share the same turf come election night this Tuesday. Both candidates have scheduled events in Ohio, one of several key battlegrounds that votes later in the month. Rena? Nicole Killian. Thanks, Nicole.
So that news report's quite interesting because it just shows you some of the campaigning that takes place and the negative adverts that the candidates run against each other, which again can make the primaries quite divisive in terms of party factions, which can then be a boost to your opponents, who, as I said before with Obama, basically watched which adverts of the Republicans hurt the winning candidate. So basically a damaged candidate won. And because of that, Sanders came under quite a lot of pressure because he did not do very well in Michigan and in those states, which was mentioned on that news clip in the primaries that happened there. And he came under quite a lot of pressure to stand down gracefully and say he was going to support Joe Biden. So they had a united party from, end of March type of thing in order to focus all their firepower against what they saw as the big enemy, which of course was Donald Trump. Of course, the other thing that was a bit odd about this primary, of course, was that COVID sprang up. So March the 13th is when it really kind of hit the United States, which then for some of the later primaries led to them kind of doing mail-only votes and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, as I just said, Sanders didn't do very well in those next lot of primaries, and he eventually drops out the race on April the 8th. And this diagram here, it's actually come from the Wikipedia page on the 2020 primaries. The ones in dark is when they drop out, the races which they weren't involved in. So Biden's in this blue down here, Sanders is the next column. It's a bit small for us to have a look at now. There's Elizabeth Warren, she didn't win any states. Michael Bloomberg won one state. It's a bit more small to see which one. I think it's American Samoa he won. Pete Buttigieg, etc. You can see how after they drop out gradually, more and more of them drop out. So in the end, you just have one left, which was Joe Biden. That said, he didn't get his majority of delegates, the 1,991, until I think it was June the 6th or somewhere like that. So again, it was a good way down before you actually did get that majority of delegates. And another issue with primaries and caucuses, there were a number of states had their primaries after Joe Biden got his majority of delegates, which again, in terms of democracy and participation, you might say, is it fair in those last states? New York, for example, was after that date. In previous primaries, it's always California's always near the end, the biggest state in America with population. This time around, they moved theirs much earlier. So again, an issue with primaries and caucus in general is it's not always fair on states that have their primary and caucus at the end, because who's really going to show up to vote in a primary when they've already know who the candidate's going to be? Anyhow, so that just gives you a bit of an idea, a bit of a flavour of the 2020 primaries. Slightly unusual because of COVID, which led to a lot of the later primaries going mail only. Campaigning was a little bit odd. Some of them, delayed their primaries, etc., etc. But it does show some of those trends whereby, the candidates whittle themselves down to end up having one unified candidate. And I forgot to show this last little slide. Shows you the counties, how they voted. So dark blue is Joe Biden. So you can see how Joe Biden really dominated the race. This is Iowa here. Well, it's 100 counties with Pete Buttigieg. And then obviously here you've got New Hampshire. But gradually, you've got Nevada here, which is the third one. Yeah, this is South Carolina, which Joe Biden wins handsomely. And it's really since that one that most of these states end up going for him. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of a flavour as to how primaries and caucuses kind of panned out in 2020.